Jasas.
Hola.
Vítejte. SYNAPSES Academy.
Welcome to the SYNAPSES Academy podcast, a podcast in which experts from various fields provide their tips on sustainability citizenship in education. The idea of learning organizations increasingly resonates with schools throughout Europe. Perhaps you've already embraced the concept, or you are curious to learn more about it. Either way, in this podcast, we present the Learning Turbine, a tool that helps us understand how learning in a learning organization does not take place in a vacuum, but relates to the learning of other actors in the school. Although this idea may not seem new in itself, Loes van Wessum visualized this process in a way that is intuitive and easy to work with. So quickly grab your pen and paper and draw along as we talk you through it. Today I'm joined by Loes van Wessum, Senior Researcher of Inclusive Leadership in Education at the University of Applied Sciences of Windesheim, and Senior Researcher at the European School Heads Association. Loes mainly researches the way in which teachers, school leaders, and boards continue to grow professionally, and how the school culture intertwines with the learning of pupils. Am I saying this correctly, Loes?
You're saying it right. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get back to that later. But first, before we delve into this, I'm curious, why did you want to start working with inclusive leadership yourself?
Because what we see that in schools, very different students and very different staff members are working in the school. So if you want to use all those different perspectives, it's important to be inclusive. And as a leader, you can give the example.
Yeah, okay. So as a leader, you should be well prepared for...
You should be well prepared, and you should be able to embrace all the differences and to know that all the perspectives are worthwhile, and you need all those perspectives in order to develop the organization you want and in order to develop the kind of education you want to provide your students with.
And it's your mission to spread this message and to help
That's
them.
right.
Perfect. Well, I think many people have this idea of a school as a very top-down institute, that a school leader instructs a teacher instructs a student. But you're saying with your learning turbine, well, they influence each other's learning. Why is it important to understand the school culture in this way?
Because learning is a very complex process, and you can't make another person learn. The other one has to learn by themselves, and you can offer them the opportunities to learn. It's important that we offer students the opportunity for deep learning. So are they also able to be critical about things they encounter? Are they learning to know who they are, what kind of citizen they want to become? Etc., etc. And if you want learners to be learners themselves, you can't give them directions. They have to find it out themselves, but you can offer them the support in order to do so. And the same counts for teachers and school leaders. You can't make teachers learn. You can't make school leaders learn, but you can offer them the opportunities to learn. So that's one way of looking at it. And the other way, if you want students to learn, it's important that teachers learn. And teachers can learn by the learning of their students, because they want to enhance the learning of their students. They have to understand the learning processes of their students. Because the school is there, in the end of the day, the school is there for the students. And of course, it's also very important that the teachers feel welcome and they feel at ease at their school, and they know that they can learn by themselves. They can learn for themselves. But in the end, they learn for the learning of the students.
So your model could be of great help in understanding this, or at least visualizing this process. Loes, can you maybe explain a bit what this turbine is about and also what it looks like? Because it looks great, very cool.
I will start with the latter one because it's not easy to imagine it when you're only listening to someone.
Yeah, exactly.
But imagine a turbine, and if you're not well technical, very great, like I am, it's easier to imagine a pumpkin or an orange. If you peel off an orange, you see the different slides of an orange. And if you look into the slices, you can make a difference between the slices which symbolize the learning of the students. There are several slices which symbolizes the learning of the teachers, and there are other slices which symbolizes the learning of the leaders and the school board. And those slides are perfectly combined. And taken together, they form the learning turbine. And in the heart of the turbine, or in the heart of the orange, if you want, there is in the orange, I don't know what the name is in English, but there's some kind of white material within the orange, and that white material is the heart of the orange. And within the heart of the orange, or within the heart of the learning turbine, it's important to have a rich learning environment for all.
this podcast is also about learning organizations. How does this turbine relate to a learning organization? This is a concept I think many people are familiar with.
Yes, well, looking at the school as a learning organization is very important because the complex questions you are encountered with as a school, you have to develop your school as a learning organization. The research is very clear about it, and also the politicians have concluded, well, that's the way to go about it. A learning organization, in its essence, is about being very vision-driven, being driven about, okay, what is what we want our students to learn and how do we want our students to learn it. If you have a very strong vision, if you know what you're there for, it's very important, and it's the core of your of looking at the school as a learning organization. So that's in the heart of the learning organization. And imagine circles surrounding each other. The middle circle is the vision. The other circles are about learning of all the people in the school, are about developing a learning culture. So it's more a cultural approach, and developing a structure which is necessary in order to enhance the learning of all the people within the school, and also organizing in the way so that it's possible to learn. For example, if you want teachers within a high school to work together, it's very difficult if they can't meet because of schedule problems. So that's a very simple idea of using the structure in order to develop a collaboration between teachers, which we know is a very important part of being a good teacher.
Yeah, so the whole infrastructure of the school has to be oriented towards learning.
Yes, that's right. That's a nice way of putting it. Thank you.
Perfect.
And the connection between the learning turbine and the school as a learning organization is that the learning turbine focuses on the learning processes. And a learning organization is far more than only looking at the learning processes within the school, because it enhances all the other parts of developing a school.
Yeah, because when I go back to the visual, I have it in front of me now. I highly encourage listeners to look it up. We'll provide the resources in the show notes. Basically, it doesn't really have a beginning. I'll just start with teachers, because three slices, let's put it that way, if we stick with the orange, are the same for every group involved. So it starts with, for example, for teachers, interventions of a school leader. That goes to learning activities of a teacher, and then learning outcomes of a teacher. Why did you put these three together, and how can we think about that when we look at the turbine?
Well, the most simple thing to do is to take those words and look into the learning processes of students, because the words you're using, we are familiar with those terms if we look at the learning of students. If you want students to learn, it's important to know what kind of learning outcomes do we desire for these students, or do the students themselves desire. So that's the starting point. What kind of learning outcomes do we desire with our students? If we want those learning outcomes to be realized, students have to do something. So they have to undertake learning activities. That's the second slice. And in order to engage within learning activity, it's important that the teachers do something, and they can enhance the learning of the students by using the interventions they can use, pedagogics they can use.
Ah, yes.
That's one way of looking at it. If you're looking at it the other way, it's also very important that teachers look at the learning of the students, and they decide, well, what's happening if a student doesn't get the results we want them to get. And in a lot of schools, it's very normal that teachers say, well, the students were lazy. They didn't do their job, so that's why they didn't get the students' results we want. And the learning turbine shows that it's never the students who are in fault here. It's always the possibility. It's always the obligation of the teachers to look at the student results and think, well, if a student isn't doing the right things, if he doesn't get the right learning results, I should see it as feedback for my role. So that's the other way of looking at it. And that's also in the turbine. I've mentioned not a singular teacher, but it's always plural. So it has to be all the teachers together in order to enhance the learning of all the students. Of course, in a lot of schools, teachers are working very solitary with their students, and that's one way of enhancing the learning of the students. But it's very important that they also collaborate in order to understand the learning of all the students, because it's too difficult a job to do it on your own.
Yeah, and the same goes between school leaders.
And the same processes play there for the learning of the school leaders and the teachers. If school leaders consider themselves to be the teacher of the teachers, the same words can be used for the learning of the teachers. So if we want students to learn, it's important that teachers learn. Teachers can learn by analyzing studying the learning of their students. So they have to be inquisitive. And a school leader can enhance that kind of learning, for example, by providing them opportunities, providing them time to look at the learning of the students. And if by doing so, we can also say, well, it's important to determine what kind of learning outcomes we want our teachers to get. For example, for a lot of teachers, it's very difficult to ask the right questions which enhance the thinking of the students. So when you're giving instruction, not all the teachers are able to ask questions which are really demanding for the students. So it's not about repeating what we have already learned, but it's about enhancing the students to think critically by themselves. For a lot of teachers, this is very difficult. So they have to learn it. So one of the learning outcomes of a student could be, of a teacher could be to learn how to ask such a kind of inquisitive questions to students. And in order to do so, they have to enact on certain learning activities, and the school leader can provide them with those learning activities.
Yeah, I think that's very, very clear. I suggest we make a connection to sustainable citizenship, because in the end, that's what the project Synapses is about. Of course, the emphasis of our project is that you have to implement sustainability citizenship within the core of your school and your school vision. How can a learning turbine help us or help school heads to do so?
Well, I think I'm going to repeat myself, but I think it's very important to know what your vision is about sustainable citizenship, and together with your teachers should be able to explain what kind of learning outcomes do we like our students to obtain in order to become sustainable citizens. So that's the first part. It's very important to do that collectively.
Yeah.
And what I haven't told yet is that the member of the board have a very large distance from the student outcomes, because they don't work with students every day. But they have a very important impact on the student outcomes, because they are the ones who can, together with the school leaders and the teachers, decide what kind of learning outcomes would we like our students to obtain. So the vision development, again, also about sustainable citizenship, is very important. So that's one way of looking at it.
And do you have maybe a practical example of how this vision could play out?
Well, a very practical example is in the Netherlands, and I think that might be true for the other countries as well. If students have had their lunch, most of the time it's a big mess in the canteen, in the place where they have been eating their lunch. And in a lot of Dutch schools, it's very normal that students have to clean up that mess, and that they're scheduled. So one day these students have to clean up the mess, and another day the other students have to clean up the mess. I believe that it's not helpful for sustainable citizenship, because, well, I can make a mess and somebody else will clean it up. What kind of message are we sending to students if we organize it this way? So if you're looking at sustainable citizenship, it should also be possible to say, well, we're not going to clean it up. We'll see what will happen. And I predict you that in a couple of days, students will get tired of the mess they have to eat in, because nobody has cleaned up the mess. So they will decide themselves, how can we make it an agreeable place to have our lunch? And by doing so, they will feel the obligation to feel responsible for their own environment, being the school canteen. So this is a very small example of learning by doing, learning by reflecting on what's happening and thinking about your own role in how do I connect myself to the environment.
Takes a bit of courage as well, I think.
I think it takes a lot of courage. It's difficult because the result will not be there on the short term.
Yeah.
But on the long term, there might be even bigger results than when you tell students what to do. The other way of looking at the learning turbine and looking at a concrete example for sustainable citizenship is being a great example. Not only about the simple idea I just mentioned about cleaning up your own mess, but also do we see our school as an ecosystem from a sustainable point of view? Do we give the right example as teachers? For example, if teachers all arrive at schools within their own cars, are they giving a good example?
Yeah, I see. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any practical tip that school leaders can implement tomorrow or during the next meeting? But I think I hear you say very clearly, start with the school vision and then think about the infrastructure of your school and how you enable the learning of the students in the way that you want. Did I summarize it well?
You did. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Well, then last but not least, we ask this to every guest in the podcast. Do you have any personal piece of climate advice for our listeners?
Well, I think the nicest way to answer that question is to take you back some time. When our daughter was about 11 years old, she brought in a playmate. And that playmate asked our daughter, Sanne, what kind of rules do you have in your house?
Very polite, that is.
Very polite, very polite. I was very enthusiastic about it. And I had to think about that question. And my answer surprised myself and my daughter was, well, I think it's very important that you take care of yourself, that you take care of each other, and that you take care of the environment. And I hope that we have been given the right examples to our children in order to commit ourselves to those rules. And I think that those rules are also a way of looking at a very simple way of looking at the vision of the school.
All right, very beautiful. And that feeds into the learning turbine again.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Loes.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to our listeners for listening.
You were listening to an episode of the SYNAPSES Academy podcast. For more information about SYNAPSES or to learn more about our speakers, please look up the links in the show notes. This production was funded by the European Union and produced by the European Schoolheads Association. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the consortium only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them.